Welcome to the Plan to Eat podcast, where I have conversations about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you save time in the kitchen, reduce your grocery bill, stress less about food, and delight in dinner time. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Plan to Eat podcast. Welcome back from our little break. Today, I have an interview with Rebecca Zipp. Rebecca lives in Colorado with her husband and 2 kids. She has been using Plan to Eat for the last 14 years, which means she's been using it from the very beginning, which is so special. Today, I have her on the podcast simply to talk about her meal planning process. She plans on a month-to-month basis, which means she plans out 28 meals at a time. So I was really interested to hear her process for meal planning, how she decides on recipes, a little bit about how she includes her family in the process. And this is just a great conversation, mostly focused around Plan to Eat. So if you are interested in hearing somebody else's nitty-gritty details of how they use the program, this episode will definitely teach you some things. And without further ado, here's my interview with Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Why don't we get started by just having you do a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm Rebecca. I live in Colorado. I have 2 kids. We homeschool. And I guess because this is the Plan to Eat podcast, I can talk about Plan to Eat. I've been using it for 14 years. I just looked it up the other day. And my family tries to eat locally and seasonally if we can. And yeah, I run a website where I sell homeschool resources, primarily for art. I have a degree in art history. So I appreciate being able to use that for the homeschooling community. So yeah.
That's wonderful. I did not realize you'd used Plan to Eat for so long. Are
Yeah.
you connected with Clint and his family at all? Is that how you heard about it so early?
No, it was through a blogger who I actually used to do virtual assisting for
Oh, cool.
bloggers. And she was the one who introduced me to it. Was Stephanie Langford of Keeper of the Home.
Oh, okay.
And she was using it in 2010 and promoting it. And so that's how I originally heard about it.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, we have quite a few people who actually have used the program
Mhm.
since the beginning, but I just don't get to talk to them very much. So this is really exciting.
I'm glad it's exciting. It's a good
Yeah.
product. So yeah, it has longevity.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, that is why I want to have you here is to talk about your meal planning process because I know that you have a very detailed, interesting process. So why don't you just walk me through what it looks like to create a meal plan for you and your family?
Okay. So I do monthly meal planning. I've done weekly in the past, but just recently in recent years, actually probably the last 10 years, monthly has just worked better for us. So I do a monthly bulk order from a company, a bulk food order. And when that order is due, I sit down with their catalog, with their sale catalog, and then all of my cookbooks and my laptop and plan out my meals for the next 4 weeks. So I have 7 categories, one for each day of the week, and it's mostly related to protein. So Monday is beef, Tuesday is a vegetarian dish, so usually we'll do beans or eggs. Wednesday is pork, Thursday is chicken, Friday is fish, and then Saturday I do staples. So these are meals that I make at least once a month, so like a roast chicken or tacos or spaghetti or something like that. And then Sundays are soups. And I have my categories, and then I come up with 4 meals for each category. And then that gives me 28 meals for the next 4 weeks. And once I have my list, I pull up Plan to Eat. And that was another thing I checked. I have 2,200 recipes in Plan to Eat, which I think means I have a problem. But I pull them up and I put them into my calendar for the next 4 weeks. And then I'm able to use that to generate a grocery list so that I can order what I need from the bulk food company for the next 4 weeks. And that's it. It's kind of simple, I guess, maybe. I hope.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's awesome that you're able to plan for a month ahead of time. That's like a goal for me. I think I'm at like the 10-day mark still, and I can't seem to get over that. I always have to go back to the grocery store. Well, I guess how often do you actually grocery shop? Is it just once a month?
No, usually I do have to go once a week to get things like we buy raw milk, but I use pasteurized milk
Mm.
to make like yogurt and kefir and stuff. Or if we need like sour cream or things that I don't order from the bulk food company, I'll get those like once a week. But usually, depending on the time of year, my grocery list for the local grocery store is pretty small.
Oh,
So,
okay. And so the bulk ordering, is it a wide range of products like available? I'm just wondering, are you only offered certain like cuts of meat at certain times of the year? And then is that how you decide what the recipe is that you're choosing? Or is it just, we're having beef? What are all of the things we can imagine with beef?
well, we get a beef side once a year. So we get
Okay.
half a cow, and we store that in our freezer. Most of the stuff we get from the bulk food company is called Azure Standard. I don't know if anybody else has mentioned it on your show.
Mhm.
Andrea actually may have mentioned it. It's like I said, it's called Azure Standard, and it's mostly what we get from them is either frozen stuff or shelf stable stuff, but we can buy it in bulk, and then they have
Mm.
their own brands. So, it's just that sort of stuff. Usually, if there's something on sale, I will plan that into the meal plan. But like I said, we tend to like to eat seasonally, and then because we have the meat in the freezer, it's really just whatever we're in the mood for and what's available at that time.
Okay. And so then so I also buy beef from a local rancher, and I feel like there's certain times where I'm like, okay, the only thing we have left is ground beef. And so we're eating ground beef for the next 2 months.
Yeah.
How do you keep some variety in your meals when it starts to dwindle like that?
Well, I try to mix it up over the course of the year. So, if I know I have, so many pounds of ground beef, every month I'll plan like 2 cuz I get mostly ground beef, 2 ground beef meals and then maybe steaks and then stew meat or a
Mm.
roast or whatever. So I try to spread it out over the course of the year. I actually use up my roasts really fast because it's the easiest thing to just throw in the crock pot. I mean, I throw it in frozen solid in the morning and I have a meal at night. So sometimes I go through those pretty quickly, but I try when I'm doing my meal planning, I try to take that into account. Like, okay, I want to use different cuts through the month.
Mhm. And then you mentioned eating seasonally.
hmm
Can you tell me some of the ways that you are able to ensure that you're having seasonal ingredients? Do you use Plan to Eat for that, or is it just like your own common knowledge of what's in season?
Well, we're part of a CSA.
Mm.
So, during the summer months when we get our produce from the CSA, that kind of determines what our side dishes are going to be. So I keep certain recipes in Plan to Eat for produce that I know we're going to get a lot of. So right now it's zucchini. We have so much zucchini. I have, zucchini recipes. And so when I'm doing my monthly meal plan in the summer months and then early fall, I don't plan side dishes. So
Mm.
it just depends on what we get from the farmer. And then when I find out what we're getting, then I'll put in like, okay, then we'll have this side dish this day or whatever. That determines what we're going to have during those months. For the
Mhm.
winter months, I generally stick with like root vegetables, potatoes and carrots and onions and things like that. Stuff that I know would be available locally, and if I can get it locally, I will. And sometimes that's not easy. So, especially here cuz we don't have what I've heard is that Colorado doesn't have a lot of variety in produce compared to other places. So, I'm happy with what we can get.
Mhm. That's been my experience as well. And I wanna say that I've looked at a couple different websites before related to seasonal eating, where it'll
Mhm.
tell you what's based on your region, it'll tell you what's in season in your area, and, yeah, in Colorado, there's really not a whole lot, which makes sense, like, the ground
Right.
freezes for a lot of people for most of the winter, so even having root vegetables and stuff is really impractical here.
Yeah, and I think, like, the CSA that we're part of, they do have a winter share that you can get, and it's stuff that
Mm.
stores well. So, again, like, potatoes, winter squashes, and things like that. I think what our big thing here is meat. I think
Mhm.
that's just what we do well, really well here. So, I'm thankful for
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, I agree. So, when you're making your meal plan, do you involve your family in that process at all of deciding recipes, or is it a time when you just, like, enjoy doing it yourself?
I try. I do ask them before I sit down and just say, does anybody have any requests for the meal plan this coming month? If somebody has a birthday coming up, I'll ask them what they want on their birthday. But for the most part, they just kind of let me go to it and what they get is what they get. So maybe in the future they'll sit down and if they have complaints, they can help me with it.
Yeah. And related to that, with homeschooling your kids, do you have them get involved in some of the cooking as part of their homeschooling education?
We've done it in the past. A couple of years ago, when they were old enough that I felt like they could do that sort of stuff, we went through the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook for Children,
Oh.
and just read each section, like, over the course of a 12-week term. We just went through every section and then, made a meal or a snack or whatever from each section for that week, and that worked really well. I think it gave them a really good basis for working in the kitchen. For a while, I was trying to schedule once a month that they would make a meal together on their own from that cookbook, but it just didn't work out really well for various reasons. So now recently, I have one night a week where one of them helps me cook supper. And so they're still learning, basic kitchen skills, but they're also learning some of our favorite recipes that our family has and are on repeat. And my hope is that, they can take those with them when they go out on their own and they'll have a love of cooking, but also hopefully some good memories of
Mhm.
us spending that time together and cooking will be something that they enjoy.
Yeah. I think that that's one of the most important things that I've heard from other people being on the podcast is saying that there's just such a powerful bonding moment to be had in the kitchen
Yeah.
when you're able to get your family involved and to teach your kids skills. And I think that, I mean, and I think that if you grew up in a household where your family did include you as a child in the cooking process, like I have those memories
Mhm.
myself of being a kid and helping my mom. And so that's really special.
Yeah. Yeah, and now you're promoting a product that helps with that. So that's really neat.
Yeah, it is great. Yeah, one thing that when I talked to Andrea on the podcast, she talked a lot about food as a source of connection.
Mhm.
And I just think it's a really important thing that we should be reminded of and something that we often don't think about is just how we eat every single day, most of us,
Yeah.
and multiple times a day. And so there's just so many opportunities there to involve other people in our lives in that process.
Yeah, and it can take time too. It takes a big
Hmm.
chunk of my day to make a meal, especially our evening meal. And if I can combine that time with teaching, our values, like food values and stuff like that to my kids, but then also spending that time with them, it's kind of like I'm multitasking. So
Hmm. Hmm.
it's handy.
Yeah. So do you primarily eat in a nourishing traditions style?
Yeah, mostly. I'm sure that we might be considered cheating in some areas, but for the most part, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we cook everything, most of our stuff from scratch, and we eat meats, and we soak our grains and consume fermented things, and yeah.
Are there specific features in Plan to Eat that you feel like help with that style of eating?
Yeah, your prep feature, I think I don't know if I have the exact terminology, but where you can add the, X number of days
Mhm.
before soak this or whatever. So I use that for when I know we're gonna have rice or something, I'll add that, and then, on the calendar, it adds a little note that
Mhm.
says, "Take your rice out." Or if I'm gonna have, like, yesterday, as a matter of fact, the little notice popped up that I needed to take my whole chicken out of the freezer because I'm going to be having that in a few days. So, yeah, that has definitely helped a lot.
Mhm. I think Andrea mentioned that in her episode as well, and that was actually really enlightening to me. I subscribe to some of the ideas of nourishing traditions, but
Mhm.
don't incorporate all of them in the way that I eat. And soaking grains is one thing that I'm trying to do more of. And so, like talking about that and being like, oh yeah, this is the way that I think I'm going to enable myself to make this happen.
Yeah,
Instead of relying on my brain to remember, oh yeah, we're going to have rice
right.
tomorrow.
Right, right. You can always do it, like, sometimes I cheat and I do it in the morning and then, try to do it as early as possible, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So with a month-long meal plan, I imagine that there are times that, like, things just don't quite work out
Yeah.
because
Oh,
it's a whole
definitely.
because
Pretty much every month.
yeah, because that's a while to plan ahead for, and life is often very unpredictable.
Mhm.
So what are do you have any tips? Like, if somebody else is trying to learn how to plan ahead for a month at a time? Do you have any tips to help them navigate the unexpected?
I think just be flexible, expect that things are gonna pop up. One of the other features that I really like on Plan to Eat is the freezer option.
Mm,
It's actually really satisfying to be able to put a meal into my little freezer count list on there. One of the things that I do when I'm laying out my meal plan is look for meals that freeze well,
mhm,
and I'll plan to make 2, um, batches of that for that evening. And so I'll just duplicate it and put it on the 2 of them for that day on the schedule. And then the half that I have frozen, if there's a day that pops up where we're gonna be out all day and maybe I didn't have that originally planned when I made the list, or a day I just don't feel like cooking because that happens, I can just pull something out of the freezer, um, and you can always rearrange things. So, like, sometimes I'll have leftovers, and so I'll use the leftovers in a secondary dish that week, and so I'll have 2 of the same kind of protein that week, and so I can take whatever I was going to make that day and make it later in the week or make it the next week. So, it's really, like, assigning the 28 meals to specific days helps me kind of have it all laid out, but they don't necessarily have to go on those days. It's just so that I have what I need in place to make sure that I don't have to think about meal planning for 4 weeks.
and so how often do you feel like you're normally doing this, looking at your meal plan and maybe making revisions? Is that like a do you do that on a weekly basis? Is it like every couple days?
It's usually once a week when I sit down to make my grocery list.
Mhm,
So I'll look over the next week and say like, "Oh, we have dentist appointments and I didn't remember that," or whatever this day. So I'll have to rearrange things for that day, but it
mhm,
doesn't take long at all just
right.
to switch things around.
So in my meal planning, I often plan fewer recipes. You listed that you plan like 6 recipes a week, which to me, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that feels like a lot," because we almost always every single recipe that I feel like I make, I end up with some sort of leftovers, and so if I were to
Mhm.
plan 6 recipes in a week, we would end up wasting a lot of food. So how do you deal with some of that food waste, particularly when it comes to either unexpected leftovers or like a night when your kids are like, "I'm not into this," whatever
Mhm.
the case may be?
Well, we use leftovers, so when I'm laying out the meal plan, there's certain meals that I know we're gonna have leftovers. So if I make a big roast, we're gonna have leftover beef. If I make a
Mhm.
whole chicken, we're gonna have leftover chicken. And so maybe in the days after that, I'll plan a cottage pie to use up
Mm.
the leftover meat. Or we have a fish dish that uses leftover mashed potatoes. So I'll plan that after that. Or for chicken, I'll make like a soup or something. We definitely use a lot of it for lunches, which is really handy, even if I'm the only one who eats it, if my kids don't like it. But it's just nice to actually, I love leftovers because it takes care of that sort of stuff. We don't often have them just because of the portions that I make. I'm just used to, how much we normally eat. Yeah, like I said, it's nice when we have them.
Mhm. I like leftovers for lunch as well. It beats just having like a sandwich or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then when it comes to some of these more traditional foods, traditional dishes, you mentioned that they can take a long time to prepare.
Mhm.
Do you do any sort of meal prep to make some of this easier? I know, like, you could consider, like, soaking your grains and stuff as a form of meal prep, but is there anything else that you do to speed up that process at all? Or maybe you don't like to speed up the process? I don't know.
Well, I would love to speed up the process if I could. A long time ago, I read about somebody who did all of her chopping on Sundays, like she chopped up all her veggies and stuff, and I've never been that person. I don't
Mhm.
think I ever will be. So most of it I do the night of. There's certain things like for breakfast, we have muffins every morning. So I'll make a big batch of them like once a week and freeze them. So that takes care of that. Or I'll make a big batch of oatmeal one day and then just store it in the fridge and reheat it when we need it. But for suppers, usually I know that it's going to take time. There are some that take longer than others. Yeah, I guess I've just accepted that it's gonna take some time, and
Mhm.
that's just kinda how it is. So,
Mhm.
it's in ways it can be cathartic. Sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook while I'm cooking, Or, if my kids are helping me, we talk about other stuff. So it's nice. But there are definitely days where I'm like, okay, this is taking a long time. Gotta get through it.
This is not really related to that, but another thing I wanted to ask you is does anybody in your family have to be on a special diet or have any dietary restrictions you have to work around?
Yeah, so we're all gluten free. My
Mm,
husband and I were found to have a gluten sensitivity in 2009. So we've been gluten free since then. And when our kids came along, we just stayed that way because, it's easier for everybody if we're
yeah.
all eating the same. My daughter has a shellfish and an egg white allergy. So really the only thing that affects, sometimes I'll make crab cakes, and in those cases I'll make something else for her. And if I make something that calls for eggs, I'll either leave out the whites and just kind of try my best, or I'll make her an alternative. So it's adaptable. It's not, we've been doing it for so long that it's just kind of second nature now.
Right. Yeah, particularly living in the area that we do,
Hmm.
finding alternatives for gluten-free things is super easy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Um,
what I've found too.
yeah, and I think it has only gotten easier as time has gone on.
Yeah. Especially the gluten free stuff.
It's just, I don't think that this is probably the same in other parts of the United States. I think that some people still really struggle to find gluten-free alternatives to things, but in Colorado, we have a pretty good food culture here, I think.
I think so, especially closer to where you are, like Boulder. I remember
Mhm.
when we first started eating this way, we would go to Boulder because it was one of the
Yeah.
few places where we could find like restaurants where we could actually eat and things. So we were thankful for that.
Mhm.
We're
Absolutely.
further away from it now, so it's not quite as easy, but it is easier, like you said, overall now.
Mhm. Well, I'm sure then with your bulk purchasing, some of
Hmm.
that would be a place where you would be able to really take advantage of buying gluten-free things as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't normally buy, like, the very specific things that we buy are gluten-free would be, like, noodles, like pasta
Mm.
noodles, but otherwise, just because we're making so much from scratch, we just use alternative grains, so, like, I'll use buckwheat or oats to bake things or almond flour, so I don't necessarily have to buy, like, specifically gluten-free stuff, which has made it easier in the long run, but it's nice to have that option when we want something fast or we wanna eat out.
Mhm. Well, I feel like I asked all of the questions that I was thinking about for you. Did you have anything else that you wanted to mention or talk about before we go?
I don't think so. It's been fun chatting with you, especially about Plan to Eat, because, like I said, I've been using it for such a long time, and it's something that I share with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's neat to be able to talk to you about it.
Yeah, this has been great. Do you wanna just share your website in case anybody wants to learn more about, your homeschooling resources?
Yeah, it's a humbleplace.com, and I do have some food related content on there. I have the list of things that we buy from our bulk food co-op. I have some meal plan ideas on there, monthly meal plan ideas, and then I also just recently posted how I go through my monthly meal plan process. So those are all on there.
Oh, perfect. That'd be great. Cool. Well, thanks again for joining me today. This has been so nice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. I will have a link in the show notes to Rebecca's website as well as her Instagram handle in case you want to go follow her. She posts a lot about art history. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should definitely give her a follow over there. If you like the Plan to Eat podcast, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed wherever you get your podcast. The more subscriptions we have, the more our podcast gets promoted to other people so that they can find us. And next week, I will be back with an episode with Riley. So I hope you look forward to that, and I'll talk to you then.